So here is a lesson plan before differentiation and after differentiation. And I want you to pause the video and read through the before differentiation, after differentiation, and try to identify how it is different. I'll give you just one example and then you can pause the video. Okay, for instance, before differentiation, there is a certain system and routine that the teacher follows. First, the teacher introduces the unit and the topic. The students read material. The teacher gives note. The students do an activity. Then students do the homework. The next day, the class reviews the homework. Teachers gives more notes. Students practice the skill. They watch a video. They discuss the video. Then teachers assign a project. The students work on a project, the class review the project, students take a test, and then class moves on to a new unit. After differentiation, the first step is for teacher to pre-assess the students' knowledge of the new unit, okay? And then the teacher introduces the lesson. Because the pre-assessment, based on it, everything happens, like all of the planning happens after the pre-assessment, because you will have more information about your students after the pre-assessment, okay? That's the reason. So after the pre-assessment, then the teacher can go back and do some changes in their plans, right? And then the teacher will introduce the lesson. They will read material at varied levels and give those materials to the students. Okay, again, you can give choices to the students. Teacher and students discuss the key concepts together. And then the teacher gives notes in guided form with demonstrations, again, to meet the learning styles of the different learners. The teacher assesses the students' comprehension of the material. So again, here, there is an embedded formative assessment to see where the students are at, their levels, their understanding, their readiness, and their interest. The students do tiered activities, okay? So the teacher creates different tiers for the same activity, and I will explain that in a minute. Students complete their choice of the homework, again, giving choices. And then the next day, the teacher assesses understanding. Students do paired work of their choice, oral, written, or creative. Again, meeting the different learning styles and different intelligences. Students do jigsaw based on interest. Teachers offers review session on skills because you need certain skills to do certain projects, right? So learning the skills is sometimes assumed by the teacher, but if you know about your students and you know where they stand in terms of abilities and skills, then you can review their skills and review what is needed for this project. Class discussion with questions at varied levels of abilities. And then you don't have to start with the most dumb question and then go up. You can verify the questions and diversify them, okay? And students take tests, group test portion, or common test with differentiated free response elements, okay? And this is how to to differentiate tests. You can give a mixture of the test questions or give choices or have the students choose the style that they want to answer the questions with, okay? So let's differentiate together, okay? And here's where you're going to pause the video at every step. The first step is to gather information through students' self-reflection, post-assessment to learn about students' readiness for the next lesson or next unit. So you're going to give them the pre-assessment before beginning a new unit or new lesson, okay? And this pre-assessment is important because it gives the student an impression that the teacher really cares about who they are, what they're interested in, and their learning. And at the same time, the teacher gathers information about the students. So they know exactly what they're comfortable doing, what they enjoy doing, what they like to learn, So if you pause the video and read the questions here, you're going to find that it asks questions that would help the teacher in planning their lesson based on the student's interest and readiness, okay? Step number 2 is to think about the new lesson's content. So um, you cannot actually start teaching a lesson without knowing what the lesson is about, right? So first thing is you're going to select the standard. It's a disciplinary standard. For instance, if you're a science teacher, you're going to select a next generation science standard. If you're a social studies teacher, you're going to select either the state of Connecticut's standard or a National Council for Social Studies standard, and so on. And secondly, you're going to try to answer the questions regarding declarative knowledge. Declarative knowledge are basically the facts that students need to learn, and why do they need to learn the facts. So why it's important to answer this question for yourself. Why do students need to know this? Because if you understand it, then you can communicate it to students, okay? And then what details must students learn? Do they need to learn it as a broad concept, or do they need to delve in depth into some parts of this concept? What necessary vocabulary or terms or phrases are needed? Okay? And this is the declarative knowledge. On the other hand, there is the procedural knowledge or the skills. So, what processes do students need to learn? And what should students be able to do years from now? And it's important to think about the transferable skills, because we're not just teaching students to, just succeed in this lesson. We want them also to transfer the skills to do other lessons and units in the future, right? So what skills do students need to learn, and what steps or rules will students need to follow? Okay, answering those questions is important in the planning stage, because you will understand. First, you gather the pre-assessment to learn about your students, and now you are gathering this information to know exactly what you want to teach in terms of content. Step 3, know your students' interests in the new lesson through a new pre-assessment. So the first pre-assessment was about the last lesson and what they found comfortable or uncomfortable, right? This pre-assessment is about this current lesson. So let's say the lesson is about sports. Okay, you want to know what students really want to learn about sports, okay? You actually ask questions about what sports they enjoy participating in, what sports they enjoy watching, what sports they'd like to try, what do they want to learn more about, okay? Do they want to learn about the sports history, the famous players, the records, the rules, the equipments needed, and also, what can you tell me about the following sports events? And you list the events that are part, all of this is part of your new lesson, but you're asking them in a way that really gauges students' interests, so that you understand what students are interested in learning really about this topic. Okay, and this will help you again in the planning. Like we said, 95% of differentiated instruction is really in the planning stage. After gathering all of this information and knowing your content and knowing your students, you're going to develop your differentiated lesson plan. And here are the different parts of the lesson plan. The lesson plan starts with the hook, and then you have the introduction of the lesson, and then you have some practice for students to practice the skills, and then you have a project to gauge students in the content and the skills, and then you have an assessment to assess students learning, and you have a closure activity. Okay, all of this happens within the 50 minutes of the lesson, or the period of the lesson. Some examples of lessons hook include, for instance, a movie trailer, a video clip, a picture, a mystery box hook, listen up the music hook, okay? You can also start with a creativity activity, a short book hook, a gallery walk hook, the kinesthetic hook, or the adventure hook. But you can also start with a question, especially if you're using inquiry. You can start with an inquiry question and try to connect, or, setting the stage and trying to connect this lesson to students' life. When you differentiate for different cognitive abilities, you can use the Bloom's taxonomy when planning your lesson. We know that Bloom's taxonomy is about the learning level of the student that goes high or up in the scale, right? So if you want just to classify the knowledge as just knowledge that requires memory, then you will have to ask students to know this information. And this is all based on the standards, by the way, but then you can differentiate the standard based again on the student's cognitive level. So knowledge is the least or the lowest in the Bloom taxonomy level, and evaluation is the highest in the Bloom's taxonomy cognitive level. So in knowledge, students just memorize things and they recall things from memory. In comprehension, it requires them to understand it, so to explain it. In the application, then they know how to apply this knowledge to determine the answer to a question, okay? We're thinking, for instance, about a math problem. If they know the steps and they understand how to do the computation, then they can actually apply the knowledge, and this is the application stage. The analysis requires identification of motives or causes or the drawings of conclusions because it's higher up in the scale. And then synthesis requires making predictions and considering situations in which there is more than one correct solution or response or producing an original communication. Synthesis is basically a conversation between the different scholars about, what this is or what this means. And evaluation is the highest in the Bloom's taxonomy. It requires making judgments or giving supported opinions. Here are some differentiated activities for students to practice skills during the lesson. There are whole class activities like brainstorming, introduction of concepts, planning projects, pre-assessment, and whole class activities are good because then students can observe other students engage in those activities, and actually students learn very well from other students too. So when you engage the students in whole class activities like a Socratic discussion and sharing results, everybody learns. And the small group activities, this is very strategic because you can place students in these groups based on different cognitive abilities. We all know of the zone of proximal development in which how close the students are towards the achieving the goals of learning, right? So we can place students with different levels, cognitive levels, so that they can teach each other. Also, different skill level, and they can teach each other. For instance, jigsaw, planning, reading, teaching, testing. They can all help each other out along with the teacher. Individualized activities, it's to give students the space and the choice for them to select the activities that they are comfortable doing. Like, for instance, activities that allows them to apply skills, graphic organizers, homework, journals, self-assessment, testing, independent work, okay? The student and teacher conference, it's for evaluation, for guidance, and for planning, okay? So you do the conferences with the students to assess, to see where they're at, to kind of see if you need to do like a whole class instruction again. You need to guide the class, the whole class. You need to focus on specific individuals. You need to alter some of your future plannings.